Following the liberation of France, which started in June 1944 and was mostly concluded, with the exception of areas towards Alsace and some western ports by the end of August of that same year, rebuilding France's military industry quickly became a top priority for the new French government. Once a world leader, the French military industry had become considerably weakened by years of German requisitions and Allied bombings. If France wanted to retain an important and independent place on the world stage, a healthy military industry would prove a massively useful tool. Hello, and welcome to another Tank Encyclopedia voiced article. I'm your host, Dan, and today I'll be covering the Chasseur des Chars des 76,2 mm AMX Chassis S35, an odd French tank destroyer concept from 1945 based on the pre-war Sommois S35 hull. If you like our videos and want to support us, please consider donating on Patreon and PayPal. All of the funds will be used to improve future Tank Encyclopedia content. Any help would be greatly appreciated. The first phases of the French military industry getting back on its feet often took the basis of pre-1940 vehicles being modernized to suit modern needs, such as the Panhard 178B, the first armored fighting vehicle produced by France post-war. Within these, one could name 3 tank destroyer projects which were submitted by the Atelier Mécanique d'Issy-les Moulineaux, AMX, in November 1945, mating the hulls of 2 pre-1940 French tanks, the R35 and the S35, with the British 17-pounder anti-tank gun. There were 3 different proposals for the 17-pounder armed tank destroyers based on old French hulls. 2 were based on the Renault R35 hull, one with front-facing and one with a rear-facing gun. These both dated from 8th November 1945. The third project actually predates both, with 2 documents. A 3/4 top view of the vehicle dated from 11th October 1945, and a set of plans dated from the 10th of October. As for the choice of the old French tank hull, while a number of S-35s were seized after the liberation of France, this number remained limited, and the project was most likely never seriously intended for production. Instead, it was likely a proof of concept, and a way for AMX's engineers to get back into designing armored vehicles on the basis of familiar components. One could argue that, in comparison with the R35, the S35 would provide a more viable basis, being a larger vehicle more suited to mount a heavy gun like the 17-pounder. Mounting the 17-pounder on the hull of the Sommois S35 obviously required some major changes to the superstructure and hull, though perhaps more moderate than on the lighter and smaller base of the R35. In the case of the S35, pretty much the whole front section of the upper hull and turret were removed in order to accommodate the 17-pounder and fighting compartment. However, the engine compartment and rear part of the hull would be kept pretty much unchanged. Overall, removing the turret would free up 2,350 kilograms. A further 1,850 kilograms of upper hull armor plates would be removed as well. With all of this removed, the Sommois, before receiving any of the additional equipment, would go down from 20,000 to 15,600 kilograms. In place of the previous front upper hull, a new large armored superstructure would be installed. This was a fairly high superstructure, though, at a maximum height of 2.25 meters, the tank destroyer would overall be shorter than the S-35 tank. This superstructure, however, retained a bulky and massive silhouette the tank would have lacked. The weight of this armored superstructure would be 2,000 kilograms, which was a lot more than on the R-35 proposals. Though this may partially be explained by the superstructure simply being, to an extent, larger, it was also likely better armored to an extent, though the vehicle's armor protection would most likely still have been lower than on the S-35. This new casemate housed the British 17-pounder anti-tank gun, one of the most powerful anti-tank guns fielded by the Allies during the Second World War. In the form mounted in the tank destroyer, it weighed 1,630 kilograms. The gun was installed quite far forward in the hull, so as to leave sufficient internal space between its breech and the engine compartment for the vehicle crew. As a result, it overhung the front of the hull by a whopping 2.86 meters, bringing the length of the vehicle to 7.93 meters. This gun, placed far to the front, also brought the center of gravity forward by point or from the middle of the fifth road wheel from the front of the vehicle to about the middle of the fourth road wheel from the front. The gun had a field of fire of 29 degrees to the right and about 16 to the left. It could elevate 22 degrees and depress to 9 degrees. The vehicle featured a 250 kilogram rounded maintlet, similar to the two R35 proposals. Unlike those two, the larger size of the S35 hull meant that there was little overhang of the casemate over the engine compartment, though the casemate featured a form of bustle which contained an ammunition locker. The vehicle retained the same power plant as a conventional S35, a somewhat 8-cylinder 190 horsepower engine. However, the S-35 tank destroyer would be somewhat heavier than the basic S-35, with an estimated weight of 21,658 kilograms, which would have resulted in a power-to-weight ratio dropping to about 8.8 horsepower per ton, and the vehicle could overall be expected to be somewhat less mobile than the original. The plans of the S-35 tank destroyer, as with the two R-35 projects, depict it with a crew of only two. A driver, sitting to the left of the vehicle and given a vision hatch through the new armored superstructure, and a commander, which would presumably also operate the gun all by himself. It is very unlikely that such a crew configuration was actually intended to be used. More so than on the R-35 projects, the armored superstructure of the S-35 allowed for enough space to accommodate at least one, if not two, additional crewmen, which would be more than helpful to operate a gun such as the 17-pounder in optimal conditions. Two different ammunition lockers were provided for the vehicle. One was located to the right of the driver, below the gun's breech, and accommodated 24 shells. A larger ammunition rack was installed in the form of a bustle formed by the armored superstructure towards the rear, which would contain 54 shells. Finally, 4 shells would be stored on each side of the armored superstructure to form ready racks, giving the vehicle a total ammunition carrying capacity of 86 rounds, or 1,978 kilograms of ammunition, to which one may add 200 kilograms for the weight of the ammunition lockers and racks. This meant that firing all of the vehicle's ammunition would considerably lighten it up, by more than 9%. This S-35 project could be argued to be the most reasonable and realistic design of the three which were proposed by AMX's engineers in late 1945. This was simply due to the fact that the larger S-35 hull would provide a far more viable basis for a large anti-tank gun such as the 17-pounder in comparison to the R-35 hull, which would struggle to accommodate such a gun in a way that would make it operationally viable. This was simply due to the fact that the larger S-35 hull would provide a far more viable basis for a large anti-tank gun such as the 17-pounder in comparison to the R-35 hull, which would struggle to accommodate such a gun in a way that would make it operationally viable. Nevertheless, it remained an obsolete concept. A fairly slow, not amphibious or airborne, open-top tank destroyer would have served as an anachronism in the post-war battlefields had it been chosen for production. This would not, however, be the case, with the few remaining Sommois S-35s in French hands continuing their service as cavalry tanks until 1946 in the 13e Régiment des Dragons, and even as gendarmerie vehicles for some years in French North Africa. The Sommois S-35 tank destroyer would likely have remained an obscure project in the archives of AMX, were it not for its introduction into wargaming's world of tanks as the S-35CA. Even for what was only a blueprint, the vehicle could be modified by the player into an ahistorical configuration there, by replacing the 17-pounder by a 99mm anti-aircraft gun. From the start, the vehicle is also powered by the 220 horsepower engine intended for the S-40, and is later given a so-called S-40 bis 260 horsepower engine. This was also wrong compared to the historical configuration of the vehicle and was obviously added as a gameplay element, disregarding the historical project. A pretty systematic policy for wargaming, which many other French paper projects, the likes of the AMX 40, have suffered as well. The S-35CA is one of several French low-tier vehicles which are often laughed at by the community due to their shape. In the case of the S-35CA, it has received the name of Bathtub, due to the shape of its massive casemate. This concludes our video on this obscure AMX project. If you liked this vehicle, please leave a like and subscribe. You can find more information regarding to this vehicle in the full article. Links in the description. If you like what we're doing here and want to let us continue working on these videos, please consider donating on our Patreon or PayPal. All of the funds will be allocated to improving our articles and videos for you. Until next time, keep us in your sights.